All right, guys, welcome on in. Today, I wanted to kind of go over something that's been on my mind for a little while, and Paul Tassi actually wrote a little bit about this in Forbes. So what Paul Tassi wrote about was actually that Diablo 4 isn't going to have gear sets at launch. Now, this isn't necessarily news to any one of us. If you've been following Diablo 4 at all, you knew that they didn't plan on introducing gear sets at the beginning of the game. Now, I kind of want to go through this article and look at it together because Paul Tassi was able to sit down and talk to some of the developers and kind of get their sort of justification about why they're trying to not implement them at launch. But let's get into the article, let's talk about it, and then when we're done, we'll sort of sum up why we feel the way we feel. So I'm not going to read every line of the article, I'm just going to kind of skim through and pick certain paragraphs and talk about them as we go through them. So, Paul Tassi asked why they weren't going to put gear sets in at the beginning of the game during the game's launch. And the reason that was given is such. The reason we shied away from gear sets, at least for the launch, is it's a live service game. So I'm not going to promise anything's forever, because I don't know eventually, 5 years from now, what the decisions will eventually make, Adam said. It's our philosophy and our idea for why we didn't put them in for the launch is that as much as we can, we're trying to chase more open-ended game design in which players can choose how they want to get to their destination. So to really unpack this, because it was really wordy, what Adam was trying to say, right, is they didn't want to put game sets in because they don't want to pigeonhole players into only playing one or two or three styles. They want to leave the game sort of open, right? So you can kind of use all of the gear at your disposal and build your own sets instead of using these 6 pieces for this particular build. On its face, this seems like a great idea, but it's something we'll talk about a little bit further into the video. So Adam then continues, a lot of the times the way I talk about this with my designers is our job is to imagine that you're on a road and you're trying to get somewhere. We will give you the destination and we'll give you a lot of different roads on how to get there. The tornado druid, for example, is your destination. I want to fill the screen with tornadoes. But as far as where do you get the itemization, where do you get the legendary powers? Which ones do you decide to equip? That's up to you for how to get there. And there's a lot of winding, different ways you can eventually arrive at that endpoint. When it comes to sets, a lot of times you can think within the framework. We give you the endpoint, and then there's only one road to get there, which is acquire these 2 or 3 or 6 very specific items, and that's the only way to get there. Our North Star of Diablo 4, at least for right now in design, is that we don't want to be that prescriptive as far as the fantasies and the things that we're selling you. All right, so what this boils down to from here, right, is what they're saying is we want to give you a lot of different paths to come up to the end point. And in giving you only one set, that pretty much just creates a straight line from point A to point B for you to get to that end point. So again, in theory, this sounds very, very good. You can go a lot of different ways to get to the end point, correct? So then Paul sort of sums up his feelings at the end of this article and says, you know, he kind of gets Adam's answer. He equates it to the Division and Destiny and a few other games where you have sort of multiple paths to get to the same end point. And he says he kind of sees how this could be good for the game, right? So now's the point in the conversation where I really want to weigh in, because I like to look at things from both sides of the coin, right? I want to play devil's advocate when I can. So what I want to sort of look at in this conversation, right, as far as this conversation goes, is I want to look at the concept of a path, because I feel like it's analogous for what we're looking at here, and it's going to help sort of show my point, or at least it's going to show my viewpoint, why I think no sets equate to having sets. Now that might not make sense to you right away, but give me a second and we'll draw this, okay? So in this sort of situation, right, we have a point here. We're going to call this beginning, right? This is the beginning, and this is our end point. Now, so to get from the beginning to end, the easiest is going to be to draw a straight line, right? Now, that's not to say that you can't make other points to get to the same place, right? But the goal in this analogy is that you will eventually arrive to the same point. Now, there might be some dead-end roads along the way. There might be some that branch off and maybe go a little bit further than others. But at the end of the day, not every road will take you to the end point. And not every road is equally fast to get to the end point. So what does this mean? So if you've played Diablo 3 at all, there's a gem you can use, the LOD gem. And the point of that is you're not supposed to use any set items in order to build your own non-set setup and try to see how far you can go. The problem is that even something like using the LOD gem has a set that most people use. There are best in slot pieces and best in slot items that everyone chases to try to fill in all of those void slots. So while there's no specific set for you to acquire, there are specific pieces that are better than others that people typically use. Having said that, you can play with builds and off-meta builds that will do decent and will get you very far, but they typically will not get you as far as the best builds and the best sets in the game. So now I want to bring this in line with Diablo 4. Diablo 4, I believe, will have a lot of different itemization choices, but at the end of the day, not everything is going to perform equally well. There will be standouts and there will be things that fall by the wayside. While you might be able to use a lot of different items at the beginning point of the game, here, as you go further into the game, more and more of those build options are going to start falling off of being viable. And then what will happen is towards the end point of the game, when you get to this end build here, if you're trying to do the most optimal and the best, other things will start to fall short and you will eventually move into the best builds, which will require you to use specific items. This will create non-official sets that people chase every season. Now, can you mix them up? Can you buff and nerf certain items to make different pieces better or worse moving forward? You can. And that's a little bit harder to do with sets, right? Because if you do that with a set, you can mitigate the entire set. At least this way you can change up the gameplay by just changing one piece of equipment here or there. The whole point of this conversation for me was to show that not having sets doesn't create no sets. Not having creates will indeed create sets in the game. They will just be a mix of different gear that is either better or worse or best in slot. So on its face, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like, players will eventually figure these things out. In the beginning of the video, I mentioned about how this is actually going to be more of a problem for casual players, and I truly believe it will be. And the reason is, at least when there were hardcore programmed in sets in the game, a more casual player could just find a set and just build into that set and play the game. They didn't need to go off game. They didn't need to go to third-party websites. They didn't need anything else to try to find a way to make that in-game set viable. So what I think is actually going to happen a little bit with the lack of sets in the game is it is going to sort of make things a little bit harder for your more casual players in the mid to late game, because Diablo 4 is poised to be very open-ended, and it could be very hard to try to figure out what is the best way to play. So in our example here, while there might be a bunch of ways to get to the end game, if as a casual player your path goes like this, it might take you 5 times longer than the person who took the most direct path, and you might not be able to complete your arc before the end of the season. And I think that could create a bad experience for casual players. Again, I do like to play devil's advocate. I understand that there was a lot that went into this decision, and we need to see it play out in game before we really say if it is a good or a bad system. But this is food for thought and something that I definitely want to put out there and get your guys' opinions. So definitely let me know what you think down in the comments below. And as always, have a great day.